exploded by my trench and penetrated my brain. I've been circling around like a bat in the dark recesses of my dim consciousness, patching together a picture of a new world from scraps of the collision. And that was the context for you to describe the rehab. And if you can go into a little bit more detail, the kinds of things that you did in terms of work as opposed to miracle.
Yeah. The interesting thing, it took me years. People keep asking me, how did you make it? And I keep saying, I don't know. But one thing I know, I was so terrified by the new situation I went into. I was married then, and Noga, my wife, told me that she felt that I'm in a kind of hysterical state of hysteria. I felt that suddenly you wake up in the morning and there is nothing left from anything in the world that you know. Nothing. No, I used to walk, I cannot walk. I used to recognize people around me like my child, and I don't recognize them. And I used to know math, physics, things like that. And suddenly I just remember names. I cannot do anything with it. I remember that once I was able to read, once I was able to write, suddenly it's not there. And my response to that was very strong fear. But here we are. You probably know about the 3 F's in zoology, the 3 basic behaviors of animals under stress: fight, flight, or freeze. These are called the 3 F's in zoology. And there is the ability to fight, to escape, flee away from the situation, or freeze. In my case, my response was to jump on the situation I was facing, trying to break it, or to succeed to gain again what I lost. But I did not understand what I'm doing. It was just, I can imagine it's a kind of an animal banging its head on the cage, trying to get out. And there was no logic or no cognitive control on what I was doing. This was kind of an automatic response. And now, after years, when I start to understand what happens, and I think that this is my response to the feeling that I'm not a human being anymore. In the book, I'm saying, what is a human being? In the end, what is a human being? But eating, by thinking and controlling responses. And those 2 things I lost. Any animal is doing all of what we are doing, but one thing we are unique about, we are able to control our responses, and we are able to think. And those 2 things I lost. And I felt that I lost it. And my luck in this case was that I did remember that once I was something. I am working with lots of brain injured people today. And I can distinguish or make 2 groups out of them. This is the group of people who forgot what they were, and people who remember what they were. Those who forgot what they were are maybe lucky because they don't remember anything, and they can be very happy with what they are now. But I remember that once upon a time I was a human being, and that was a very frightening situation. And to me, maybe this is my Bulgarian background of very, simple people who are responding, simple but lively people. So my reaction was to try and solve the situation. I could not try and resolve the situation. I couldn't live with this feeling that I'm doomed. And And then this response took me into this long, it's a lifetime journey of learning again from scratch. It was learning to walk, learning to orient myself, learning to write, read. This is like every moment in my disability, every situation is an obstacle, is a challenge that you need to think how you solve it. Like even before this meeting, I had to think, how do I present these pictures? Because of my limited vision, I don't see all the buttons on the monitor. I have to train myself before and figure the way to bypass my limitations. So to your question, Ian, what you call miracle, for me, is just endless hard work. And it is, in the book, I describe very meticulously, in much detail, this long process of sitting hours and hours and just writing letter by letter. And then slowly, after hours and hundreds of hours like this, the letters became words and the words became meaningful only because of the act of hard work. Same thing for learning to walk again, learning to orient myself, to find my way. Part of my injury has to do with the orientation. I was injured in the right side of the brain where the center of orientation is located. And slowly I found out that I'm losing my way everywhere I go, which means every time you go somewhere, even entering a house that you never visited before, every time you need to think, how do I get out of here? Where is the way back? And this is the kind of place you always have to control and prepare and be in alert in what you're doing.
Great. I was intrigued by the way the book was written. It was written as narrative writing as opposed to historical writing. In other words, it's not a historical review of what happened, but it's a narrative story. And again, I want to read a quote from the book and then ask you to comment on it. I've been writing this story in my mind for decades, since the day I was declared dead. Like a nebula, it has been swirling around in my mind, finally coalescing into a lucid, starry whole. This is not a historical document, but rather a story I tell myself today, from a distance of almost 40 years, about my war and what happened when it was over. So if you can talk us through the way you did it, the way you write the story, the way you expressed your story.
You see, the basic problem of a trauma is, and this is true for all traumas, it can be a Holocaust, can be a war, can be rape, anything. That the trauma is an event that if you let it control your life or manage your life, it becomes what we call a post-trauma. Post-trauma or post-traumatic person is a person who let the trauma enter his or her life and managing his life. Now, part of the ability to cope with trauma and avoiding getting into becoming a post-traumatic person is to be able to tell yourself a good story about what happened. Because after the war, one of the things, and I think that many of you, if you have relatives from the Holocaust, for example, and we know that guilt feeling is a very basic feeling that many people from the Holocaust came with. Feeling guilty for being rescued or for surviving. I felt very guilty after the war. I didn't feel a hero. I felt that I was a loser. When I went to the war, I am from the generation who was raised in Israel under the notion that we are supposed to sacrifice ourselves to the country. And I was such a kind of a person who was, we call it in Hebrew, Schwitzer. I don't know if you know the term in English. If any one of you knows it, maybe you tell the rest what that means. Someone who likes to show off, to show how big of a hero he is. And I was one of that kind of people, and my wife actually told me, I was sure you're going to die in the war because you always jump, you always try to show off. And then I was suddenly, and in the war, I realized that I'm not willing to die. I'm not willing, and there was a situation that is described in that book. We are welcome to read it. That I describe how we are entering an ambush, and here is my big chance to die as a hero, and I cannot do it. I can't, and I like most other people, I take a shelter. But this revelation that I'm not a hero as I thought, it's a big disappointment of myself. And you feel very guilty for it. But when you write a book, and it took me for about 40 years to start, no, less, 30 or something years, to start telling this story. The act of telling the story is an act of relieving yourself from the pain, from the guilt, because a narrative story, unlike a historical story, a narrative story is mainly mechuyav. What do you say?
Forces you.
Sorry?
Forces you.
No, the story is mechuyav, is devoted, or it's historical. In historical story, the reader expects you to describe the real facts. In a narrative story, you are expected to write something that is based on reality, on the facts, but it is a kind of interpretation of yourself of the facts in which you grow up and becomes better than you entered. For example, if you read those two sections, the first paragraph and the last paragraph of the book, the ones I sent you this afternoon, that will illustrate.
I'm coming to it.
Yeah, I will talk about it in a moment. Just imagine when you write a book about a big trauma that you suffer from, the moment, it took me about 6 years to write it. The first paragraph of a book probably reflects or represents the state of mind in which you enter the story. And the last paragraph reflects or represents the state of mind you end the story. And if there is a difference between those two, this represents the changes that you went through, the emotional, psychological changes you went through during the writing process. And now, Ian, if you read those two paragraphs, can you?
Yeah.
This is the first paragraph of the book. Listen to it and think what it reflects or what it represents.
Right, let me get there. Bear with me a second. The three memories. Yep.
Yeah, but just the one.
When I'm reading literally the first paragraph. When I think back to the childhood of my two sons, I'm deeply saddened over the promises unkept, over not having known how to share my world with them, not being a father to them the way a father should be, calm, strong, upright, and confident, a rock to lean on,
Okay.
and always, last sentence.
Okay. That's enough. So if you listen to this paragraph, it reflects a feeling that I'm not a good father. I was not a good father to my children. And that is the feeling I enter the story, writing the story. Now you read the last paragraph that describes my feelings in the end of the book after 6 years of writing. And it describes a small moment I returned from daycare with my son.
So before I read the paragraph, I was going to introduce it by saying the last thing that I wanted to touch on was this idea that you went from a bad father to a good father through this whole process. So the first part of the extract I was going to read was exactly that, the bad father not having to cope. And then, of course, this is the last paragraph. You come up to me and you put your little hand in mine and say, Daddy, I'm hungry, let's go inside. With your hand in mine, we walk into the apartment and shut the door behind us. I watch you and Sharon as you cheerfully play. The house is flooded with light and I feel at ease. Soon Noga will be home from her studies and we'll all sit down for dinner.
The first paragraph of the book represents a feeling that I was a bad father. And the father that I regard as a good father is a rock, a very muscular, macho father. The last paragraph of the book describes a mother. I describe myself as a mother to my son. We come back home from daycare, from the kindergarten, and he says, I'm hungry. And I make food for him. I prepare food for him. This is a mother. If you want a change inside a human being while writing a book about his feelings as on trauma he passed through, this is the change from a bad to a good father, from a macho father to a mother-like father, if you want. And this is what happens when you are willing to move from a documentary writing to a narrative writing in which you tell a story. It's not exactly 100% as it happened, but when you read it again, you feel stronger. You feel that you have changed. And the story itself changes you. The act of writing changes you. And that is what I wanted to say about the narrative writing, which was a way to change to build a new cognition, a new understanding, to write a story about what happened to me. Because a human being without a story is not a human being. Every human being has a story. When you say, I'm an idiot, you tell a story about yourself. When you say, I'm a hero, I'm a war hero, you tell a story. This is the way you perceive yourself. Now, I did not feel a war hero. Until today, I don't think so. But I felt that I learned, in the book I say, I am a hero of life, not hero of death. And this is something that you learn to tell yourself a story about yourself and to stand behind it. This is the big gift of writing, of spending years on writing such narrative book.
Excuse me, that should have been on. That's just in case we had any technical problems, but we haven't got. Can I go back now to a little bit more detail of the rehab itself? Because the fact of the work, and I think that's the key here, that this isn't a miracle in the sense that you wake up and you're fine. One of the things that struck me in the book as well is the focus on the individual doctors who worked with you. Some you liked, some you didn't like, some were nice, some were horrible, is the way it comes through. And then I didn't know, one of the things that you mentioned to me was that that's not their real names. And you gave them names that were something else. So if you could talk a little bit more in the detail of how you had to work and the hard work that was put, which comes out very clearly in the book, but it's worthwhile mentioning it in your terms with us now, if you
can. Let me understand. I'm not sure I understood what is the question. Yeah. What do you want to know about the names of the doctors?
No. I just mentioned that as an aside. Yeah, the detail of the hard work. For example, when you say, and you just glossed over the fact that you wrote letter by letter. I know from reading the book how many hours it took. And people need to understand the fact that you had a blank sheet of paper, for want of a better example, that you had to put all your past knowledge and experiences back into, or new ones. How do you cope with that day-to-day dealing?
As I said, I don't have a scientific response to that, but I have to myself, when I ask myself how it happened, and I slowly realized that something big happened there, which is kind of extraordinary. But I think when I think of it, I used to say it is mainly the willingness, the readiness to work extremely hard. There is no limit in terms of how much time you should devote in order to succeed. And just give you an example. When I started to study in the university, I was planning to study geology when I was working in the field school in the Society for the Protection of Nature. And then when I woke up in the hospital, the first thing I said when I started to speak, I said, I want to study geology, without understanding that I cannot study geology. And then a few months later, when I was in rehabilitation, I was a registered student for geology. And there was a teacher of the geologists that used to come to me and teach me what he taught the geologists, the students, and I could not understand anything. When finally he came, we ended up in trying to do some basic arithmetic of third grades, and I couldn't do it. He said to me, I think geology is too much for you for the time being. It was a big crisis for me. But I didn't stop it, and I went to archaeology, and which is, if you think of it, it's about the same thing. Archaeology and geology, both you reconstruct the past by using physical evidence, like ceramic plates, pieces, or stones, or fossils. But anyway, I finished my bachelor degree in archaeology. At the same time, I was also doing a teacher certificate. And 6 years later, I started geology again. I don't know why. I don't know how. One day I went to the university and asked what I should do in order to become a geologist. And they were nice enough to admit me back. And I had to start again from scratch, studying geology, which is math, physics, all things like that. And something slowly recovered. I don't know why and how, but after 3 years, I finished my studies, and I started a master's degree. And my professor was American, who came to live in Israel and left the country. And I had to go to the United States to complete my thesis under his supervision. So I went there for 4 months, and a month later, a month after coming there was some kind of a crisis at home in Israel, and I had to go back. And I said to myself, I'm saying it as an example of what it means to work nonstop. I said to myself, you don't go back, you finish it. And then I made a calculation. I had about 100 pages to finish writing. And I wanted to go back home, not in 4 months, but in 3 weeks. So then it means you have to write 5 pages every day. So every day I stopped. I was writing 5 pages, giving them to my supervisor in the evening. He was reading them in the evening, giving it back to me with his comments. Then I used to retype them on a typewriter. Again, this is back in 1982, typing them back and then writing 5 more pages. And I finished it in 2.5 weeks. And this for me is an example of you have a mission, an assignment, you don't do it. You don't stop before you finish. And ever since then, ever since I started to gain my consciousness, I used to work like this. For example, I was sitting when I studied archaeology, sitting in the lecture room, I could not write. So I asked a student to have a carbon paper right under her summaries, or under her paper. So in the end of the lecture, I have her summaries. But then I was sitting all night to summarize her summaries. So I have my own copy. But this is taking me hours and hours because I could hardly write. And I could hardly read. This is to tell you that all what I do, all what I got, in my opinion, it's a result of very hard work and lots of creativity. It means you have to invent lots of kind of bypasses in order to succeed, to do things that your brain cannot do otherwise. I just have to say, I have 2 professorships today, one in geology and one in learning sciences. And I was working for 10 years as a scientist of a computer company, developed learning software for children. And I don't know how it goes, but I think I have curiosity and willingness to work very hard. And that is the only thing I can offer as an explanation to what happened. But being in touch with so many people with brain injuries, I'm aware of the fact that it is really not trivial to be in my situation. Just let me tell you a small anecdote. I was tested in Birmingham. In Birmingham, there is a big brain research center. And I was going there to be tested in my brain, some kind of things about the kind of recovery I had. And when they sent the papers in a journal, and in the background of the patient, me, they mentioned that I'm a professor, and the paper was rejected because they also attached my CT in the picture of my brain into the paper. And the paper was rejected because the editor said that a man with such a CT is not able to function as a professor in a university. If you check on Google Scholar, the patient YE, this is me. This is the paper that was rejected, but in the end, they managed to prove that I am a real person. But for me, it was kind of another indication to the situation that yes, there was kind of what you call a miracle, what I call a hard work and willingness to live, to function.
That's perfect timing, because what we want to do now is open up for people's comments or questions. There's just one thing I'd like to add, because another word that comes to mind in my lexicon after hearing you, right? And that's the word inspiration. Besides miracle, that we don't believe in miraculous, but inspiration is another word that absolutely springs out from this. So we've got 10 minutes now, Steve. Hopefully you've been collating comments or questions that people might have. So please, if you'd like to ask the questions to Yoram.
Hi, Yoram. Thank you for sharing your story with us. We've had a few messages here. I want to read one from someone by the name of Spencer Gelding, who writes here, Yoram, thank you for sharing your story tonight. You are a truly remarkable man. I had, I had the pleasure of meeting you in Israel through my work with Beit HaLochem, and remember this meeting well. I wish you only good health and happiness. And another one, just other people saying how inspirational you are, and what a man, kol hakavod, with health always. So thank you for sharing your remarkable story with us. Yoram, I have a question, and sorry, forgive me if you've already addressed it, but I've been busy in the background doing some other things as well for the ZF. How long had you been? How far into the Yom Kippur War were you when you were injured?
How long? You mean how much time?
Yes. No. How much time had you been in service in the Yom Kippur War? Before you got your
the war started in October 6th, and I was injured in October 18th. So
right,
12,
a couple of weeks,
12 days. Only the 3 or 4 last days were really in continuous combat after we crossed the canal.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I wanted to add, maybe it's a moment. I would like to add that, if you don't mind, something that I wanted to say about what happens to people after a trauma. Is the first thing is that they are being muted to the experience. Like, people come from the Holocaust, people come from a war, they are not able to communicate about their experience. They are muted to it. And even if their family members approach them and are interested in what happened to them, they are not able to communicate with people about it. There is a feeling, I cannot explain what happened to me. The book that I'm talking about was originally called Stories I Could Not Tell My Children. That was my basic idea, I think, when I wrote the book. I want to tell them what happened, but in fact, I wanted to tell myself, or to stop being muted to this experience. And if you want, or if it's possible, you can read from the third memory in the book, if you have time for that. Only these lines that my son comes to me and asks me. My son is now, he was 2 years old when I was injured, but now he is in the army, in one of the elite troops in the army. And he asked himself, what did my father do in the war? And here he comes to his father, to me, and ask me what I really wanted so much that somebody will ask me. And if Ian will read it to you,
yeah,
you will be able to get the idea of why such a book is so important, to be able to talk to your family.
You need to tell me where I can find it.
It's the third memory.
Yep, I got the third memory, but where?
I'll tell you. My son is standing near. It's in my second. Where is it? It's in page. Should be in page 9. Oh, page 8 in the bottom. In my third memory, you are a soldier.
Yes, okay, I've got it. Yep, okay, I've got it. In my third memory, you are a soldier home on leave. Mommy's out, and your brother Shaul is playing the piano in his room. I am standing in the dimly lit kitchen of our Jerusalem home, perusing some notes stuck to the refrigerator. You come up behind me and ask apologetically, Dad, did you kill anyone in the war? Your question delivers a punch. I've waited so many years for this salvation, for you to open the heavy locked door that I cannot open alone. To ask me about what happened there. But I turn around and shout. That's not something to joke about. Your slender shoulders droop. Your face recoils in insult. And the narrow crack through which you sought to glimpse my inner workings slams shut, never to reopen. Defeated and angry, I shoulder my sack of guilty memories and withdraw into my old habits. The gates of mercy were closed on that day, and there were no more questions about what happened in the war. Ever since, I've been trying to reach you, lying in wait for another miracle. Today, with you on the other side of the world and time fast running out, I ask myself, if it could have been different. I still have no answer.
I think this was, this section was important to illustrate the urgent need to communicate with myself, and by doing that to communicate with my family. And if you read the book, you'll see how it continued to communicate with my wife, who was my second hand in writing the book. In fact, the act of writing, when I was writing, she was helping me by being a critical reader of what I'm writing and giving me comments. And she refused completely to talk about what happened before I was writing. So the act of writing was, in fact, the act of communicating between us on what happened. And that is, I think, was important to say that about the importance of getting ownership of what happened and using the act of writing to regain my life, my family life back.
Okay.
If I can just briefly, before we hand back, there's so much we haven't touched upon. We've literally just scratched the surface of what the story is about. And I urge people, this is a book that is absolutely a must for people to read. Thank you once again for sharing. I think you've heard what people have felt, and it's truly been inspirational. Thank you. Toda rabah.
Yoram, I've got another couple of questions that I'd like to just put to you. Have you been able to help other IDF soldiers to rehabilitate, soldiers who may have sustained, who suffered similar injuries to yourself?
Yeah, I in constant touch with IDF soldiers veterans who were hit in the brain, but not only IDF, also people with brain injury. Mm-hmm. The years taught me how to communicate with people on their disaster, on their the bad event they suffer. If you want, one day we can talk about this, but this is not, it will take hours. I learned how to approach people who suffer such a situation. And yes, I'm working with quite many. I'm talking about long range work. It's like years. There are some of them I'm in touch for already 15, 20 years.
But you're saying also in civil society, not just within the IDF.
No, yes. Yes.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
And another question here starts off as a statement that how your determination to live productively is truly remarkable. So when writing in the way that you describe that you described, how many hours sleep did you manage to get each night?
I don't know. I don't sleep much also because of pain, but I don't think it's a question of hours of sleeping. I think it's a question, what I learned, if you plan your time, you can do lots of things. Because all my career, I was working at 2 places at the same time, like computer company and the researcher in the geological survey. And you have to be in control on your time and what you do. I work with plans, I admit. I'm a little obsessive, this is true. But you need to do that. I think I have the traits of the successful brain injured person, because you need to be being afraid of failing. I can't suffer failing. That's a problem. Today, when I'm 71, I begin to be more relaxed, but it's hard for me to admit that I did not succeed. And this means it gives you much energy to try again until something happens. But on the way, you spend lots of energy. You sacrifice lots of your family life or personal leisure time. I don't know what leisure time is. I'm not so good at, at wasting time. By the way, I wrote another book a year ago, 2 years ago. I published another, this time it's a novel called Tamar Labor Pain. It's about 2 bereaved women, 2 women who lost their children. And this was one of the lessons I took from those tens of years, is the understanding, the ability to look at the pains of other people. And this one is on the journey of 2 women who lost their children, which is for me the ultimate pain that a human being can suffer, to lose a child. But again, it is about the same experience I describe in this book, A Man Walks Home, the experience of what does a human being do when one day he wakes up in the morning and finds out that there's nothing left in life. I mean, do you give up or you continue struggling until something happens? The problem with brain injury, because you don't know, the problem is that you don't know. There is no guarantee that something will happen. You only do what you can. Because if you have an amputation, the doctors will give you a good, reliable forecast of what you will be able to do, if you work hard or not, or whatever. With a brain injury, there is nothing you can, no prognosis can be given to you. The only thing is you should do 2 things, and that's what I keep telling people that come to me and seek for advice. I don't know. I don't have I'm not a prophet, but I know one thing: if you work hard and try, there is a chance that something will happen. There is no guarantee that it will happen. But if you do nothing, that's for sure nothing will happen. That's my lesson.
Very, very wise words from you. very inspirational for all of us here. Overwhelmingly inspirational. Kol hakavod, the work you do, you know, for others is amazing. Thank you so much for giving us, you know, the briefest of insights into your journey. It's really been inspirational. Ian, thank you for moderating with Yoram this evening. To all of you, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking time out. As I said earlier, you know, Chag Sameach, Chag Chanukah Sameach to all of you who celebrate. And if you'd like to rejoin us tomorrow evening, we have another webinar where we will hear from Dr. Tuvia Book all about the behind the scenes on the UN partition plan vote, whose anniversary was just a few days ago on the 29th of November in 1947, when the UN General Assembly voted in favor of the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael. So that's tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. So do consider joining us. I'll send you all details in the morning. I'll also send you details of Yoram's 2 books. And thank you very much, everyone. Chag Sameach.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Doreen, bye-bye.
Shalom. Shalom.
Toda rabba.
Toda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing.